Today is October 25th, 2024, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And in this video, I'd like to provide a guide for students who are studying in the Academy's Aesop's Fables course. In this video, I'm going to read and reflect on fable number 20 in the course, which is Aesop's fable of the frogs and the fighting bulls. The frogs and the fighting bulls. Now, what we do when we study Aesop's fables is we read through the fable carefully and then reflect on it to make sure that we know all of the details of the fable, because many times the important points that are made in the details. So we've got to make sure we know all of the information that's shared in the fable. Then we consider what moral lesson Aesop was seeking to communicate to us, to teach us through this fable. Fables are often unrealistic stories. They're not intended to be realistic. They're not historical. They're just imaginary. And so in the details, they're not to be taken seriously, but the purpose of the fable is to teach an important moral lesson. So fables are actually very important, not for the details of the stories, but for the moral lessons that they teach. So we want to read them carefully, make sure we learn all of the details of the story so that we can reflect on what the moral lesson of the fable might be. So we'll talk about the moral lesson. Then we'll look at the characters of the story and ask why Aesop might have chosen to tell this story or teach this lesson in the way that he did. And then lastly, we'll consider how we can apply this fable with its moral lesson to our own individual lives. And that's often the most challenging part. So let's get started by reading the fable of the frogs and the fighting bulls. A frog, one day peeping out of a lake, saw two bulls fighting at some distance in the meadow, some distance off in the meadow. Calling to his companions, "My dear friends," said he, "whatever will become of us?" "Why, what are you frightened at?" asked one of the frogs. "What can their quarrels have to do with us? They are only fighting which shall be the master of the herd." "True," answered the first, "and it is just that which causes my fear. For the one that is beaten will take refuge here in the marshes and will tread us to death." And so it happened. And many a frog, in dying, had sore proof that the fears which he had thought to be groundless were not so, in fact. This is the fable of the frogs and the fighting bulls. So let's take some time now, having read the fable, to think through the details and make sure we understand everything that Aesop has shared in this fable. We see that the characters in the story, we have frogs who are living safely and quietly out in a lake. We see the frog peeping out of a lake. And far away in the meadow, a meadow is a field where cows graze, a grassy field. So this field, this meadow, is far away from the frogs, far away from the lake. And out in the meadow are two bulls fighting. Two bulls fighting. And the way that bulls live is that they live with a bunch of female cows, and usually the male animals in the herd fight to see who's going to dominate, who's going to be the leader of the herd. So these two bulls are fighting. as bulls normally do. But it's far away from where the frogs are in their lake. And one of the frogs says to his fellow frogs, "We're in big trouble." And the other frog asks, "Why would we be in trouble? We're here in this peaceful, quiet, safe lake. You're looking out over the field, out into the meadow at bulls who are fighting. That has nothing to do with us. It's far, far away. They're just fighting as bulls do to see which of them will be the greatest. It's got nothing to do with us. We're safe." But the first frog says, "Actually, you're wrong. We're not safe here. They're fighting in the field. That's true. And their fight is far away from us. That's true. But one of those two bulls is going to lose the fight, and he's going to be driven away. And he's going to try to get away from that other bull. And he's going to take refuge. That means he's going to seek safety out here in the marshes, out here, out of the pasture, out of the meadow. He's going to come out here seeking safety from that other bull. And when he does so, when he comes out here, then he's going to tread us to death. We're going to have a wild bull running around here through the marshes where the frogs are. So we're going to be in trouble. And what happens as a result of this fight between these two bulls, it's going to have bad effects here where we are. And it turns out, as this fable tells us, it turns out that this frog is right. It says, "And so it happened, and so it happened," just as that frog had warned. And many a frog had to suffer the truth of what that frog warned of by dying. And it says, "The fears which he had thought to be groundless were not so, in fact." The fears that the second frog said were groundless, that means there was no reason to take them seriously, that they were meaningless, were not meaningless. In fact, they were true and right, things to be feared. The first frog was right in what he said, and the frogs had to learn that sad lesson by not listening to the first frog and getting trampled by that other bull. So there's the details of this fable of the frogs and the fighting bulls. So now we have to ask, what is the moral lesson of this fable? What does this fable teach us? Well, we can see at the end there is something of a summary of the moral lesson. We need to be careful not to ignore warnings. We need to be careful that we don't assume that our fears are groundless, because they may actually be prudent. They may be intelligent. We may be right in fearing some things. The Proverbs teach us that a prudent man, a wise man, sees evil coming and avoids it. He sees evil coming and he avoids it. He makes preparations for it so that he can be safe when that evil comes. But a foolish man just goes on and suffers for it. And we see that proverb illustrated here in this fable. Now, what the real focus of this fable is that there are these two powerful bulls, these big, powerful, terrifying bulls. And I don't know if you've ever been around a bull, but they're pretty scary. On the farm here, we've had bulls. We used to have a whole herd of dairy cows. We actually had some of the most dangerous bulls. The breed was called Jersey cows, and we had some Jersey bulls, and they can be some of the most dangerous bulls. And I got to see on many occasions what bulls could do, how they acted, how they They saw the field that they lived in and the cows that they lived with as their property. And if anyone walked into the field or made a movement towards the cows or towards the bull, the bull would start kicking dust up into the air and grunting around and threatening anybody who came near the pasture. So we always had to be very careful. We couldn't let any of the kids around out by the pasture where the bull was, and I had to use all kinds of special equipment to handle and control the bulls. So they're terrifying animals, very powerful, very, very violent, and they can be very nasty, especially when they get older. So while these bulls are terrible, we might not think that they're dangerous if they're far away. And this is what that second frog thought. They may be dangerous when they're up close, but we're not close to the bulls. We're far away from them, so everything is safe. But the wiser frog said, that's really not true. Because you're right, the more powerful bull, the bull that's going to win this fight, he's going to stay out there in the field. The winner is not dangerous. The winner is not dangerous. The stronger bull is actually not the dangerous one. The dangerous one is the loser. The loser is the dangerous one. And this is the wisdom of this fable. The dangerous one is not the winner, but the loser. Now, most of us, when we think about strong men or powerful politicians, kings and generals in the military and things like that, we might pay attention to the most successful, the victorious, the powerful, the ones who control everything. We often focus on the successful. We focus on the winners. But what this fable teaches us is that what we need to be careful to think about is what the losers are going to do, because they are often the dangerous ones. The winner is going to live where he wants. He's going to stay where he wants. The loser is going to have to leave and find another place. And what happens is the bull who wins stays among the cattle. That is, he stays among the large, strong animals where he lives out in the meadow. But the loser is made to leave and go away from the strong animals like himself, and he goes and has to take refuge or seek safety in a place where there are no big and strong animals. He's got to seek safety in places where there are smaller animals, where he doesn't have to face any threats. And so when he runs away from the trouble after he's beaten, he goes to a place where he can be safe, but when he goes to that place, he can then trample on the others who are there, the smaller, weaker animals who are there. So the loser is the one who's actually dangerous, because he's got to go and stay among the weaker. So it calls us to pay attention to the danger that the weaker people face from the losers among the stronger people. It's a very interesting lesson to think about. What happens to the losers? So, for example, let's think about the presidential election right now. All of the elections taking place. As I said, it's October 25th. We're 2 weeks or so away from the next election. So there's all of this election activity going on. The politicians are speaking. They're all over television. We're seeing all of this talk as these powerful people, these very powerful people who are in New York City and Washington, D.C., the great cities of the world, are arguing with one another and debating to see who's going to win the presidential election, or who's going to win election to the Senate or the House of Representatives, these powerful politicians. And we may say, I don't care about that stuff. I live out here in a small town. I really don't care about these politicians. I really don't care about what goes on in Washington, D.C. or New York City or Los Angeles. That's none of my business. I live way out here in a peaceful and quiet place. Who cares what happens among these fighting, powerful people? Or we may look across the ocean and may look at Ukraine and Russia fighting and say, I don't care what these crazy military leaders do with all their fighting and bombing and killing. That's on the other side of the planet. I really don't care about that. I live in a safe and quiet, peaceful place. What does that have to do with me? We may be tempted to think like that. We may like to enjoy our lives in quiet and peaceful place. I certainly live in a quiet and peaceful place. I live in a town called Monroe, North Carolina, down in the southern part of North Carolina. Very quiet, peaceful place, beautiful weather, really no trouble at all. I tend to not want to be tied up in all of the controversies of ambitious people in the big cities. I like to enjoy my quiet, peaceful life. But this fable warns us that we're wrong to think that these battles among powerful people are not going to have any effect on our lives. We're wrong to think like that because they will. Now, whoever wins the presidential election, that winner is going to stay in Washington, D.C. That winner is going to live and work among all of the other powerful people in government in the nation's capital. But what happens to the losers? What happens to the losers? They're driven out of the city. They're driven out from those powerful circles, and they're driven back out to live and work among the common people, among the voters, among the working people. And having lost their ambition, having lost what they desired, they're forced to seek other things. And so they end up, these powerful people who have access to lots of money and lots of different groups and other powerful people, they end up in smaller towns or in states far away from these powerful centers of politics. And they then compete no longer with their peers. They no longer compete with other powerful politicians, but they then turn and live among the common people and compete against local people, weaker people, common people. And they often do much of the evil that bad politicians do. They often do it not in the capital, but in those smaller places where they can get away with more and they can trample the little frogs, as it were. So these fights among great people that seem to be far off in the distance, they may seem to not be important for us, but they are actually important. Not directly, but because of the effects that they have. And again, not the winners. The winners are not the ones that are dangerous to us, but the losers are the ones who become dangerous. So the moral of this fable here is that when we see powerful men or powerful groups or powerful leaders fighting with one another, and it seems like they're far away from us, far above us, and really that they have nothing to do with us, that we should think about what will become of the ones who are beaten. What will become of the losers? Often they just disappear from the spotlight. But we need to keep an eye on the losers and make sure we watch what they do, because they can run for refuge in smaller places away from the cameras, and they can tread the humble people, the common people, to death, as it were. So we're taught to pay attention to the unsuccessful, powerful people. They're actually the dangerous ones. It's a very interesting lesson. Now, to think about an application, I gave one application when thinking about politics, but let's think about something for younger students. How does this fable apply to the lives of younger students? I once saw a video that was made for children. It was made for teenagers who were in middle school and high school. It was a video that warned children about hanging around with older children or young adults. So let's say that you're 14 years old, 15 years old, you're a high school student, and you know that kids go through high school and then when they get to age 18, they graduate and they go off. They go off to college or they go off to do business, but they leave school and they often leave their homes, they leave their hometowns, and they go off and start their adult lives. That's the normal thing that most 18, 19, 20-year-olds will do. And usually those who are most successful will go off and enjoy success in other places, places where they want to live and work. Not necessarily where they grew up, but in other places where there's more opportunities for learning, there's more opportunities for business, and so on. So when you're younger, 14, 15, you'll often see these students graduate high school and go off in pursuit of their plans. But what often happens is some of those students who graduate and become adults don't have success. They don't get into college, or they go to college and they get into trouble and they fail out of college, or they can't get a job. They can't find success and they end up just staying where they were. And they end up being idle, and they find that they can't compete successfully. They can't study or work successfully among adults. So what these people sometimes do is start hanging around with younger people in their towns. Instead of going to work or going to college, they may go and hang out at the playground. Or they may hang around the schools and things like that. They're idle, they're not pursuing any good work. And instead of competing against adults, as I said, and working with adults, and when I say competing, I mean working to do business and to develop things and solve problems and fix things, they end up staying where they were, and they turn and try to act like they're cool or gain a following among younger children. And this video that I was watching warned about older students who graduate and become young adults and try to hang out with younger people. They warned that this was a dangerous sign to keep an eye out for. And we might think about that and say, well, why would it be dangerous? We could think like this other frog and say, why would that be dangerous for an older person to hang out with younger people? And the answer would be, first of all, we have to ask why. Why would an older person hang out or want to hang out with younger people? It seems like something would be wrong about that. And it's dangerous for the younger people because the older people, they're often smarter, they're often more experienced, they're often stronger. Maybe they have a driver's license, they might have some money because they have a part-time job or something like that. They're compared to the younger people, they can be quite powerful. They can be influential, they can be deceiving, they can be persuasive, and so on. And so they can be dangerous to younger people, and really they're not supposed to be using their adult strengths to live among younger people. They're supposed to be using their adult strengths to go and live among other adults. And so again, this video taught that younger students, younger children need to be careful when they find older students hanging around, because often this leads to all kinds of trouble. Sometimes these older people will bully younger people, trying to act like a tough guy among weaker, younger kids. And they don't go and compete, like I said, among people their own age or pick on someone their own size. They end up going and bothering younger people. And I think that video, that warning for younger students to be careful, to be careful when they find older people, older students coming to hang around with younger students, that it's like this bull going out to the marshes after being beaten by the bigger bulls. He goes to the marshes, goes out to the safer places where there's small animals living, and then treads on those smaller, weaker animals. So I think that this fable teaches a similar lesson. So I would say a good application for younger students is to beware of older students or older people who like to spend time among younger people. That's normally not a good thing. And I think it's a warning sign that something might be wrong. And what might have happened, the reason why that older person might be with the younger people could be because in his own life, among people his own age, he's been beaten by them. He's been unsuccessful for many different reasons, possibly. And after being defeated by people his own age, by adults that he should be working with or studying with, he has run away from the market or from the college campus or from business. He's run away from that place where he should be, seeking some place where it's easy for him to live, where he feels safe, where he feels like there's no competition. And you, being one of those younger kids, might be like these frogs in the lake and have this bigger animal now come and walk around where you are and cause trouble. So I think that's a good application of this fable, which is definitely important um, in your life. And you may know people like that. Now, I'm not saying that all of those situations are true. I'm not saying any time an older person or older student stays and spends time with younger people that that's bad. They may be volunteering at church and things like that. They may just be older siblings who have other things to do. They may even be people who have real problems. But there is a need to be careful and not think that adult stuff or the adult life of some other person doesn't have anything to do with you. It certainly could have something to do with you. So I think that's a good personal application of this fable. And even to be more specific, if you were a girl, let's say you were a girl, you're a young girl, and an older boy, let's say 19 years old, 20 years old, at church started to try to talk to you or develop a relationship with you, you should think to yourself that there might be something wrong with that older boy. Why would he be interested in a younger girl? Something doesn't seem right. Why doesn't he go talk to the girls that are his age? Why doesn't he spend time with friends that are his age? There's probably something wrong in that situation. And so you should always be careful to talk to your parents about things like that and make sure you protect yourself, because it's not normal for that to happen. So I think that's good for the moral lesson and the application of this fable. Now you can think of other moral lessons as you read this. You can think of other applications, and you should. You should reflect on this fable on your own and ask, are there any other moral lessons that might be drawn from this? Many students often think of others that I don't think of, and they're very good. There's lots of possible lessons to draw from these fables and even more applications. It's easy to think of other applications that relate to your specific life and your specific situations and so on. And when you complete the assignments, that's what I'm really looking for. I'm looking for your own thoughts, some of your own creative or interesting thoughts, your own view of these fables, what lessons you learn from them, what lessons you see in them, and then your own applications, how unique situations in your own life might provide examples where this lesson in this fable can be applied. What makes your writing and your sharing interesting is not that you copy an answer for someone else. That's boring. What makes your assignments interesting is that you come up with your own ideas. You supply and share your own examples and applications and things like that. So make sure you realize that we're not looking for one answer as the only right answer when we discuss Aesop's fables. We're really looking for your answers. We'd like to learn your thoughts. We'd like to see that you study the fable carefully, that you know the details, and then that you have your own creative thoughts about the fable and your own unique applications. That's what makes your writing and your sharing interesting and important. So don't worry about getting the right answer. Just make sure you read the fable carefully, think about all the details, think about a moral lesson that you draw from the fable and how it might apply in the unique circumstances of your own life. When we think about the characters, just to wrap up here, why would Aesop choose the frogs and the bulls? It's pretty clear based on the illustration that frogs and bulls live far apart from one another. Frogs are small and powerless compared to bulls. And so, if one of those bulls was to move away from the place where the bulls live, out where the frogs live, he would just trample them. They'd have no way to protect themselves from a big, powerful bull running around through the marshes. So, it gives us a good illustration of the problem. And we can compare the bulls to strong people or powerful people, and the frogs to weaker people who live in safe places. So anyway, that's all for this fable. I think that's all we need to talk about. I don't want to go too long here. We've read the fable together. We've talked about all the details. We've thought about the moral lesson. We've talked about a few different applications, and now I'd like you to reread and study this fable for yourself and then complete the lesson assessment in the Academy Study Center and submit your answers because they're fun to read and I enjoy learning what you think about these fables. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.